When I was 15 years old, I started babysitting for extra money. My parents thought it would teach me responsibility, and honestly, I liked kids well enough. The family I'm about to tell you about lived in my neighborhood, just 4 houses down from mine. The Hendersons. They had 2 kids, a 6-year-old girl named Emma and a 4-year-old boy named Lucas. Sweet kids, easy to manage, and the parents always paid well. This particular Saturday night, they were going to some charity gala downtown. Mrs. Henderson showed me around the house, even though I'd been there twice before. She pointed out where the snacks were, reminded me of bedtime routines, and left me both their cell numbers on the fridge. Standard stuff. They left around 7 p.m., and I remember Mr. Henderson joking that they'd probably be home by midnight. Maybe a little later if the wine was flowing. The kids and I had a blast. We played board games. I let them stay up a little past their bedtime, and we made popcorn while watching some animated movie about talking animals. By 9:30, both kids were yawning, so I got them ready for bed. Emma wanted me to read her 2 stories, which turned into 3 because she kept asking for one more. Lucas fell asleep the second his head hit the pillow. I went back downstairs around 10:15 and settled on the couch with my phone. The house was one of those newer builds with lots of windows, really open floor plan, which I normally liked. But that night, once the kids were asleep and I was alone in that quiet house, all those windows started feeling less like a nice feature and more like a problem. I could see my own reflection in the glass, but beyond that, just darkness. I was scrolling through social media when I heard it. A soft scraping sound, like something being dragged across concrete. It came from the back patio. I looked up from my phone and stared at the sliding glass door that led to the backyard. The patio light was on, but it only lit up maybe 10 feet before the yard disappeared into shadows. I didn't see anything, so I went back to my phone, convincing myself it was just a branch or maybe a cat. Then I heard it again, louder this time, more deliberate. Scrape, pause, scrape, pause. I got up and walked closer to the door, trying to see what was making the noise. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There were muddy footprints on the patio. Fresh ones. They led from the edge of the light, right up to the glass door, then stopped. Someone had been standing there, looking in maybe just moments before. I backed away from the door and immediately checked that it was locked. It was. I went around the entire first floor checking every door and window, my heart pounding the whole time. Everything was secure. I tried calling Mrs. Henderson, but it went straight to voicemail. Same with Mr. Henderson. I didn't want to call the police over footprints and a scraping sound. I'd feel like an idiot if it turned out to be nothing. I sat back down on the couch, but this time I positioned myself where I could see both the front door and the back door. I kept the TV on for background noise, but I wasn't really watching it. I was listening, straining to hear any sound that didn't belong. For about 20 minutes, nothing happened. I started to relax, thinking maybe it really was just an animal or my imagination running wild. Then the doorbell rang. One long press, followed by 3 short ones. I froze. Who rings a doorbell at 11 p.m.? I didn't move. I barely breathed. The doorbell rang again. Same pattern. 1 long, 3 short. Like whoever was out there was playing some kind of game. I thought about calling the police then, but before I could reach for my phone, I heard footsteps on the porch, slow and heavy, moving from the front door around the side of the house. I ran to the kitchen window and peeked through the curtains just in time to see a figure disappear around the corner toward the backyard. They were wearing dark clothing, maybe a hoodie, and they moved with this awful confidence like they knew exactly what they were doing. I grabbed the biggest kitchen knife, I could find and called 911. My hand was shaking so badly, I almost dropped the phone twice. The dispatcher kept me on the line and told me to stay inside with the doors locked. She said officers were on the way, but then she asked me something that made everything so much worse. She asked if I was alone in the house. I told her no. There are 2 kids upstairs sleeping. She told me in this very calm but firm voice to go upstairs, get the kids, and lock ourselves in the bathroom. She said, "Do it now." I ran upstairs, my legs feeling like they might give out at any second. I went to Emma's room first and shook her awake. She was groggy and confused, asking what was wrong. I told her we were going to play a quiet game and picked her up. Lucas was harder to wake, but I managed to get him moving. I herded both kids into the hallway bathroom, shut the door, locked it, and sat on the floor with them pressed against me. Emma started to realize something was actually wrong and began to cry softly. I told her it was okay, that the police were coming, that everything would be fine. That's when I heard the sound of breaking glass downstairs. The dispatcher heard it too and told me to stay quiet and stay put. I could hear heavy footsteps now, someone walking through the house. They weren't trying to be quiet anymore. I heard doors opening and closing, furniture being moved. Emma was crying harder now, and I had to cover her mouth gently and whisper in her ear to please be quiet. The footsteps came upstairs. I heard them in Emma's room, then Lucas's room, then in the hallway. They stopped right outside the bathroom door. The doorknob rattled. Once, twice, then harder. Whoever was on the other side started pushing against the door, and I could hear them breathing, this ragged, excited breathing that made me want to scream. I pressed my feet against the door and held those kids as tight as I could. Then I heard the most beautiful sound in the world. Sirens, multiple sirens, getting closer. The person outside the door must have heard them too, because the pressure on the door stopped. I heard running footsteps, pounding down the stairs, and then nothing. The dispatcher told me the officers were entering the house and to stay put until they came to get me. When they finally knocked on the bathroom door and identified themselves, I've never felt more relieved in my entire life. They caught the guy trying to climb out a back window. He was a 28-year-old with a record for burglary and assault. Apparently, he'd been watching the house, knew the parents had left, and saw me through the windows. The police said he likely waited until he thought I was distracted or asleep before trying to break in. When they arrested him, he had zip ties in his pocket. I never babysat again after that night. The Hendersons were incredibly kind and understanding, but I just couldn't do it. Even now, years later, I can't stay in a house alone at night without checking every lock 3 times and keeping all the curtains closed. This happened 2 years ago during a weekend getaway with my girlfriend, now fiancée, Rachel. We've been planning this trip for months, just the 2 of us, a remote cabin in upstate New York near the Adirondacks. No cell service, no internet, just us and nature. It sounded perfect. We found a listing on one of those vacation rental sites, and it looked amazing in the photos. A-frame cabin, huge windows facing a lake, wood-burning fireplace, the whole 9 yards. The drive up was beautiful, especially once we got off the highway and onto those winding mountain roads. The trees were doing that early fall color change, lots of reds and golds. We stopped at a small town about 20 miles from the cabin to stock up on groceries and firewood. The woman at the checkout counter asked where we were staying, and when I told her the general area, she got this weird look on her face. She didn't say anything, just nodded and finished ringing us up. I thought it was odd, but didn't think much of it. The cabin was even more isolated than we expected. The driveway alone was almost a mile long, just a dirt path through thick woods. When we finally reached it, the place looked just like the pictures, maybe a little more weathered, but still beautiful. We unloaded the car, and I remember Rachel commenting on how quiet it was. Not peaceful quiet, but almost oppressive quiet. No birds, no insects, nothing. We spent the first afternoon settling in, exploring the property, and taking pictures down by the lake. By evening, we had a fire going and were cooking dinner. Everything felt perfect. We opened a bottle of wine, played some cards, and as the sun set, we just sat on the porch watching the lake turn dark. That's when Rachel said she felt like we were being watched. I laughed it off and told her it was probably just deer or maybe a bear far off in the woods. But she was serious. She said she'd been feeling it all evening, this prickly sensation on the back of her neck. We went inside around 10 p.m., and I locked the door behind us. The cabin only had one bedroom upstairs in the loft area, and the bathroom was on the ground floor. We were getting ready for bed when we heard the first knock. 3 sharp raps on the front door. We both froze. I went to the window and looked out, but I couldn't see anything. The porch light was on, but there was no one there. I called out, asking if anyone was there. No response. Rachel wanted to ignore it, said maybe it was a branch falling or something, but I knew what I heard. Those were knocks. Deliberate, spaced out knocks. We went upstairs to the loft, and I grabbed the tire iron from my car emergency kit. It was the closest thing to a weapon we had. We tried to sleep, but every little sound had us on edge. Around midnight, we heard footsteps on the porch, slow and methodical, walking from one end to the other. Then they stopped at the door. The doorknob started to turn. I jumped up and shouted that I had a gun and I'd use it. The doorknob stopped moving. Then we heard footsteps again, but this time they were circling the cabin. We could track the sound as whoever was walked around the entire structure. At one point, they stopped at the big window facing the lake, and I swear I saw a shadow pass across it. Rachel was on the verge of a panic attack, and honestly, I wasn't far behind. This went on for hours. Footsteps, knocking, the doorknob rattling, shadows passing by windows. We tried calling 911, but there was no signal. We were completely cut off. By 3 a.m., everything went quiet. We didn't sleep at all, just sat in the loft holding each other and waiting for sunrise. The second there was enough light to see, we packed our stuff and got the hell out of there. As we were loading the car, I decided to walk around the cabin to see if there was any evidence of who'd been tormenting us. What I found made my blood run cold. There were footprints in the soft dirt around the entire cabin, but they weren't normal. They were bare feet, and they were huge, like size 15 or bigger. And at several spots where someone had stood for a while, there were these strange markings in the dirt, almost like symbols or letters, but nothing I recognized. We drove straight to the local police station and filed a report. The officer who took our statement didn't seem surprised at all. He said there'd been complaints about that area before, people feeling watched, hearing noises, finding strange things on their property. He mentioned something about a local man who lived deep in the woods and was known to harass tourists, but they'd never been able to catch him doing anything illegal. We contacted the rental owner and demanded a refund. At first, he was resistant, but when we threatened to post about our experience online and report the property, he relented. We later found out that 3 other couples had reported similar incidents at that same cabin over the past year. The listing was eventually taken down. I still have nightmares about those footsteps circling the cabin, the way the doorknob turned like whoever was out there knew we were inside and didn't care. Rachel and I don't do isolated cabin rentals anymore. If we can't see neighbors and have a solid cell signal, we're not staying. I need to tell you about what happened when I was house sitting for my aunt and uncle last summer. They have this beautiful property out in rural Oregon, about 45 minutes from the nearest town. They'd gone on a 3-week European vacation and needed someone to watch the place, feed their 2 cats, water the plants, basic stuff. I was between jobs and figured it would be a nice break from city life. 3 weeks in the country, no rent, just peace and quiet. The house itself is gorgeous, modern farmhouse style with tons of land around it. They got about 15 acres, mostly wooded, with a long gravel driveway that winds through the trees before opening up to the house. The property backs up to state forest land, so it really feels like you're in the middle of nowhere. My aunt warned me that it gets dark out there, like really dark, and to make sure I kept the porch lights on at night. The first week was honestly great. I fell into a routine, worked on some freelance projects during the day, made elaborate meals just for myself, watched movies at night. The cats were friendly enough, and I enjoyed the solitude. But toward the end of that first week, I started noticing small things that seemed off. The motion sensor light on the back deck kept turning on in the middle of the night. My uncle had told me it was sensitive and probably just picked up deer or raccoons, so I didn't worry about it at first. Then I started finding things moved around outside. A deck chair that I knew I'd left on one side of the patio would be on the other side the next morning. The garden gate, which I always kept latched, would be standing open. I figured it was the wind, or maybe I was just forgetting where I'd left things. But then it escalated. One night during the second week, I was in the living room reading when I heard a sound that made me look up. It was a tapping on the window, rhythmic and deliberate. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, tap. I got up and looked out, but all I could see was my own reflection and darkness beyond. I convinced myself it was a moth or a beetle attracted to the light inside. I closed the curtains and went back to reading. The tapping started again, but this time at a different window, the one in the dining room. I pulled back the curtain and pressed my face to the glass, trying to see into the darkness. That's when I saw movement, something pale shifting between the trees at the edge of the yard. It could have been a deer, but it moved wrong, too upright, too deliberate. I stepped back from the window and made sure all the doors were locked. That night, I barely slept. Every sound had me on alert. Around 2 a.m., I heard what sounded like footsteps on the gravel driveway. Slow, crunching steps coming toward the house. I got up and looked out my bedroom window, which faces the front of property. In the dim light from the porch, I could see a figure standing at the end of the driveway, maybe 50 yards from the house. Just standing there, facing the house, not moving, not doing anything, just standing. I watched for maybe 5 minutes, hoping they'd leave or that I'd realize it was just a shadow or a tree stump I'd somehow never noticed before. But then the figure started walking toward the house. Slow, steady steps, and as I got closer to the light, I could make out more details. It was a man, tall and thin, wearing what looked like old, dirty clothes. He walked right up to the porch steps and stopped. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, but I didn't hit call yet. I just watched. The man stood at the bottom of the porch steps for what felt like an eternity. Then he slowly climbed the steps, one at a time, until he was standing at the front door. He raised his hand, and I thought he was going to knock, but instead, he just placed his palm flat against the door. He stood like that for maybe 30 seconds. Then he turned and walked back down the steps, back down the driveway, and disappeared into the darkness. I called 911. The dispatcher said they'd send a deputy, but it would take about 30 minutes to get someone out there. I stayed on the line with her until I saw the patrol car's headlights coming up the driveway. The deputy searched the property with a flashlight, but didn't find anyone. He checked for footprints and found several sets in the gravel and dirt near the house. He told me there had been reports of a transient man in the area, someone who'd been living rough in the state forest for months. He said I should keep everything locked and call immediately if I saw him again. The deputy's visit should have made me feel better, but it didn't. Now I knew for certain that someone was out there watching the house, coming onto the property. I started sleeping with a kitchen knife on the nightstand and my phone in my hand. The next few nights were quiet, and I started to think maybe the police presence had scared the guy off for good. Then on my last night there, it all came to a head. I'd packed most of my stuff, planning to leave first thing in the morning. I was actually feeling relieved that nothing else had happened and that I'd soon be back in my apartment in the city. I made dinner, fed the cats, and settled in to watch a movie. Around 11 p.m., I heard a sound that sent ice through my veins. Someone was trying to open the back door. I muted the TV and listened. The doorknob was rattling, turning back and forth. I ran to the kitchen and saw through the window in the door that someone was definitely out there, a silhouette backlit by the motion sensor light. They were trying the door, pulling on it, putting their weight against it. I screamed that I was calling the police and held up my phone so they could see it through the window. The figure stepped back, and that's when I got a clear look at his face in the light. It was a man, probably in his 50s, with a long, unkempt beard and wild eyes. He looked directly at me and smiled, this horrible, empty smile that showed missing teeth. Then he pressed his face against a glass and said in this raspy voice, "I know you're alone." I called 911 again, and this time I was hysterical. The dispatcher stayed on the line with me, and I locked myself in the upstairs bathroom with both cats. I could hear him downstairs, trying different doors, different windows, walking around the house. At one point, I heard glass break, and I knew he'd gotten in. I heard him moving through the house, opening doors, his footsteps on the stairs. He tried the bathroom door, rattling the knob just like he'd done with the back door. He said my name, my actual name. He said it quietly, almost gently. "Sarah, open the door. I just want to talk." I have no idea how he knew my name. Maybe he'd been watching me longer than I realized. Maybe he'd gone through the mail. The thought made me sick. The police arrived maybe 10 minutes later, though it felt like hours. They arrested him in the hallway outside the bathroom. Turns out he was wanted for burglary and assault in 2 counties. He'd been living in a makeshift shelter in the state forest, and he'd been watching the house since my aunt and uncle left, watching me. The police found drawings in his camp, sketches of the house, of me, pages of rambling writing about how I was supposed to help him or save him, disturbing, delusional stuff. I left that morning as soon as the police finished taking my statement. My aunt and uncle cut their trip short and came home. They felt horrible about what happened. Even though it obviously wasn't their fault, they've since installed a full security system with cameras and motion sensors everywhere. But I've never gone back. I can't. Every time I think about that man's face pressed against the glass, the way he said my name, I feel sick. I don't do house sitting anymore. I don't care how nice the place is or how much someone's willing to pay. Because now I know that isolation isn't always peaceful. And sometimes when you're alone in the middle of nowhere, you're not really alone at all.